William Blake's prophecy about the men of God. In Milton by William Blake, we find another prophecy that Sri Mataji mentions in her lectures even more often than the prophecies about her residences. We are referring to William Blake's prophecy about the men of God becoming prophets with powers to make other prophets. In her lectures, Sri Mataji often said that William Blake prophesied that men of God would become prophets and would have powers to make other prophets. This subject is related to Sri Mataji's residences in the UK. Sri Mataji has explained that the men of God are the same as the seekers of truth. The point is that the enlightenment of the Kundalini of the seekers of truth takes place through en masse self-realization. In the UK, Sri Mataji started this process in the Surrey Hills, initially with just a small number of Sahaj Yogis. Later, when Sri Mataji started Sahaja Yoga public meetings at Caxton Hall in London, all the Sahaj Yogis were invited to participate in the process. In no time, Sahaja Yogis were also giving realization to the new people. In biblical language, we could say that Sahaja Yogis were becoming prophets and making other prophets. This is what William Blake prophesied. This prophecy brings to mind a particular saying of Sri Mataji's about the candle. Sri Mataji often reminds us that once a candle is enlightened, it can enlighten other candles. It is in this prophetic book entitled Milton, or to use its full title, Milton, a Poem, that Blake wrote his famous hymn called Jerusalem. At the top of this image from Milton, in Blake's own handwriting, the hymn starts with that well-known line, "And did those feet in ancient time." At the bottom of this image, again in Blake's handwriting, we read the biblical quote, "Would to God that all the Lord's people were prophets." Numbers 11th chapter, 29th verse. Book of Numbers, chapter 11, verse 29. The last line of the hymn Jerusalem is a line not set to music, and therefore a line that we never sing. It is a quote from the Bible in which Moses says to his disciple Joshua, "Would to God that all the Lord's people were prophets." In a modern version of the Bible, this is translated as, "I wish the Lord would give his Spirit to all his people, so that everyone could be a prophet." In the Bible, chapter 11 of the book of Numbers, we can read the full story of a rare event during which the prophet Moses created 70 prophets at the same time. That is what in Sahaj Yoga we call giving en masse self-realization. Later, Joshua reported to Moses that two people who were not present when Moses gave the experience of collective self-realization had also started to prophesy. Moses was pleased and exclaimed, "Would to God that all the Lord's people were prophets." This event is described in verses 24 to 29 of chapter 11 of the book of Numbers. The Pentecost, an illustration by William Blake of Edward Young's Night Thoughts. Before his ascension, Jesus promised his disciples what became known as the experience of Pentecost. Jesus said, "Wait for the gift my Father promised, for John baptized with water, but in a few days you will be baptized with the Holy Spirit." Acts chapter 1, verses 4 to 5. The experience of Pentecost makes it very clear that before prophesying we need to receive the wind of the Holy Spirit and the fire of the Spirit on top of our heads. In Sahaj terms, we would say that before prophesying we need to get our experience of self-realization. The following extract from the book of Acts of the Apostles confirms this view. Acts chapter 2, verses 1 to 4 and verse 17. The Holy Spirit comes at Pentecost. When the day of Pentecost came, they were all together in one place. Suddenly, a sound like the blowing of a violent wind came from heaven and filled the whole house where they were sitting. They saw what seemed to be tongues of fire separated and came to rest on each of them. All of them were filled with the Holy Spirit. In the last days, God says, "I will pour out my Spirit on all people. Your sons and daughters will prophesy. Your young men will see visions. Your old men will dream dreams." William Blake prophesied that men of God would become prophets. William Blake foresaw that the building of the New Jerusalem would take place in England through en masse self-realization. See how the lady on the right of this picture is touching the sasrara of the central figure, and the whole scene is set in a Stonehenge-like landscape in England. This painting is plate number 100, and it concludes the long illustrated poem by William Blake entitled Jerusalem, the Emanation of the Giant Albion. In 1980, Sri Mataji visited Stonehenge in Wiltshire, England, UK. In the blossom time of Sahaja Yoga, the seekers of truth, the men of God, are getting their self-realization en masse. They become prophets, and they have powers to make other prophets, meaning that they can give self-realization to others. A Sahaja Yoga meeting of self-realization in India. In England, in the UK, and all over the world, the seekers of truth are getting their self-realization en masse, as prophesied by William Blake. I wish that the Lord would give his Spirit to all his people so that everyone could be a prophet. The meaning of becoming a prophet. When Blake wrote about men of God becoming prophets, he did not mean that the seekers of truth would become soothsayers or people able to foresee the future. In Blake's annotations to Richard Watson, Apology for the Bible in a series of letters addressed to Thomas Paine, he wrote, "Prophets, in the modern sense of the word, have never existed. Jonah was no prophet in the modern sense, for his prophecy of Nineveh failed. Every honest man is a prophet. He utters his opinion both of private and public matters." In another book that Blake wrote, intermarriage of heaven and hell. The prophet Isaiah tells Blake, "I saw no God, nor heard any," in a finite organical perception. But as I was then persuaded and remain confirmed that the voice of honest indignation is the voice of God, I cared not for consequences, but wrote. Sri Mataji spoke at great length about the meaning of seekers of truth or men of God becoming prophets or becoming self-realized people. Here are just a few brief extracts from her talks. What is a prophet? A prophet is a person who can feel the all-pervading power of love. As the Prophet Muhammad has said, "Your hands will speak, and also they act." You can easily see that when you put your hand towards the Kundalini of a person who is a seeker. You will see the Kundalini rise. When you put the Vishuddhi fingers in the ears, tilt your head back and call out Allahu Akbar, Akbar means Virata, then the Vishuddhi chakra opens instantly.